Hello and welcome to Forgotten Fronts, to our 6th-ish episode of my Scourge of War Gettysburg playthrough. In this episode, we'll be going over the mission, Howard's Luck Var, but now, the history. If you don't want to hear the history, a time should come up on your screen. If I'm not too lazy, it'll be in the comments. Now! General Oliver Otis Howard took command of the 11th Corps after the Battle of Fredericksburg. The Corps numbered 10,000 men, but after the Battle of Chancellorsville, it had been reduced down to 8,700. Half of the regiments were made up of German immigrants, fleeing the 1848 rebellions in Prussia, many of whom did not speak English. Because of this and bad previous performances, they weren't popular with the rest of the army, and thus became a scapegoat of any of the Union failures, often called derogatory names like Howard's Cowards or the Flying Crescent, in reference to their flag because it had a crescent on it. The Corps' officers were aware of this and so wanted to publish their reports to defend themselves. However, they were denied. Howard and his men did not like each other. The men preferred Carl Schurz as Sigel, the previous commander's successor. However, Howard kept his men content by keeping most of the old staff. Another reason why Howard and his men did not get along was that Howard was a church-going man who frowned upon drinking, calling it injurious to the mental and moral life of a soldier. However, Howard was a polite gentleman, at one time thanking an orderly for holding a horse for him. A small gesture, but the orderly later commented that this was the first time somebody thanked him since he entered the army, and also he could be tactful. When he heard a teamster swearing, instead of berating him in front of his peers, he took him to the side and told him that he didn't want to hear any more of that language. At the Battle of Gettysburg, by 10 a.m., leading elements of the 11th Corps arrived on Cemetery Hill, in time to see Wadsworth's troops engage Heath. At around 11:30, Howard was on the roof of a dry goods store when a courier came to him, saying that Reynolds was dead, and that he was in command of all Union forces in the field. He then told Schurz he was acting commander of the Corps. Schurz then put General Scheffelfennig in command of his division, and Schurz ordered them forward to take Oak Hill. However, Rhodes' Confederates beat him to it, and so Scheffelfennig moved his troops west of the Mummersburg Road. At some point, Howard learned that Ewell's Corps was going to hit the Union right, and so Howard ordered Schurz to protect that flank, limiting the support to the 1st Corps to a heavy line of skirmishers. As they pushed through the town of Gettysburg, the people of the town rejoiced, greeting the men as deliverers, giving the men food and water. However, the men had little time for that, as they rushed into their positions. Then the men cheered as an officer moved up. It was Leopold von Gilsa, who returned to his brigade after being arrested from not obeying an order from Barlow in a prior battle. Gilsa's men were not moving at the double quick, as they were led on by their band, only adding to the parade-like atmosphere. But as Schurz division left town, they came under heavy artillery fire. One of Barlow's memories of the march to the town was that when the civilians fled the artillery fire, one lady remained on her porch waving her handkerchief at the men. As Rhodes attacked, the heavy skirmish line was able to help to hold the forces back, even though they were outnumbered. But then they got a warning from Wadsworth saying that the Confederates might be moving around their right flank, and so Schurz and Barlow's divisions were put up forward. We know Schurz's division forming up the skirmish line, but Barlow's division was put on a small knoll, which was about 15 meters high, about 50 feet, with fences for cover on top, which Kurt's pioneers quickly began to cut to help his men deploy, before the order was hurriedly stopped by Howard. In front of the knoll there was Rock Creek, which also impeded the Confederate movements. However, other than that, the terrain behind them was nothing but featureless farm fields, with a few fences for cover. Schurz ordered Barlow's 2 small brigades on top of the hill, just to the right of Schurz's division, with von Gilsa's troops to the front, and Ames to be held on echelon behind to his right. General von Scheffelfennig was to deploy his division into skirmish formation, just to the right of the forces of the 1st Corps who just moved up. Supporting them was Wheeler's Ohio Light Battery, about 250 yards from the Hagee farm. Just behind them was Wheeler's New York Battery, by Blochers Run. However, they were extremely vulnerable to artillery fire. To their front there was, on a small hillock, was Blackford's Alabama sharpshooters. An attack from them drew most of the attention towards Dole's brigade. At the same time, General Jubal Early's division was moving to the field. Unseen by the 11th Corps, the attacks of Dole's brigade gave Early's artillery under Jones time to set up the artillery to bombard Blochers Knoll, and an artillery duel commenced as the men of Early's division moved up, just behind the troops of Barlow and Schurz. Von Stuyvesant's division waited on Cemetery Hill, just to the south, along with 2 batteries, waited to be committed at any time. Welcome back to those of you who didn't want to hear the history. We're getting into the scenario now. I immediately pause the game and investigate the terrain around me. taking command of my division commanders, as Howard rushes to Cemetery Ridge to oversee the battle. Then going over to Blochers Knoll, I prepare my defenses after taking command of the troops along the way, starting with Ames, who I'll move up closer to the command post later on, and then Barlow, and Wilkinson, who moved up for counter battery during the artillery duel. And so how I do this is I'm going to, instead of having a few regiments as a skirmish company, and I'm pretty sure that it makes no difference at all, but don't quote me on that, moving them up in one long line of infantry opposed to some with reserve. Moving other forces that were in reserve into the front line. Eventually I'll move up Ames' brigade to act as a reserve instead. Then I'll move my cannons in between the gaps in the regiment to fire canister shot, this strategy being inspired by the Blenheim mod, in which regiments get a battalion gun to support them. But in that case, those would have been 3-pounder guns, but Wilkinson's brigade, I believe, is 3-inch Parrott rifles, which are massive, long-range, rifled artillery cannons, meant to be engaged at long range, not at close range. And we can see that Wilkinson resists this strategy immediately by moving his battery back, before I take command of him and move his cannons back. And here we can see the rebels moving in from the north, Gordon and Hayes' brigade from Early's division. But while this is going on, I haven't set up my artillery yet, and so I'm slightly panicked while they move up. And here comes the rebels in huge numbers. As they advance, I look over at the Carlisle Road, which in previous attempts at this scenario is where the rebels approached from. And I'm going to move in Scheffel-Pfennig's brigade into double line there to take positions on the fences by Rock Creek, to block any attacks from roads that could come from that way. Anyways, going back to Blochers Knoll, we can see that the victory point is a silver eagle, which means it's a minor defense point. The major victory point, which would be a gold eagle, is at Cemetery Hill, where Howard and Steinwehr's brigade is holding in reserve, with 2 batteries as support. As I move my troops into defensive positions, Gordon forms line on the other side of Rock Creek, until something infuriating happens to my brigade. Gordon takes his chance and attacks. We stood eye to eye with them Yankees over the stream as more of our troops moved up. Then suddenly they began to pull back from the fence. Then we attacked, leading the charge, bareheaded, hat in hand, arms extended, and in a voice like a trumpet exhorted our men. It was superb, absolutely thrilling. But in the last minute my troops decided to reposition, moving them out of cover. And this is because I didn't take command of von Gliese or Wilkinson. Both the infantry and artillery move out of position, and at this point I'm screeching that these men should be court-martialed and shot. Thankfully I'm able to stop some of the troops before they move out of the position entirely. However, as they stop, some of the troops are the wrong way around, This isn't particularly impactful for the infantry, but for the cannons this is disastrous. Gordon takes this opportunity to attack, as Hayes' troops move in the background, and more forces move in by the Carlisle Road. But thankfully I moved by the artillery relatively quickly, and I'm able to pour canister on them. However, some of the forces being deployed backward took heavy morale hits and have fallen back quickly. In the background we see a high-ranking officer, I assume it's General Early. Then I go around my officers a second time, double-checking that they're under take command, to prevent any further insubordination. As I reposition the 25th Ohio, courier comes in with orders, which are a bit late. The rebels appear to be approaching our position. I've sent couriers to the 12th and 3rd Corps to come to our aid. Kindly tells the General, with my compliments, that I've noticed a rebel attack and will hold my position for as long as I can. While I'm shuffling around my frontline forces, one of my cannons break. However, 2 more take its place, moving in to blast canister into the Confederate ranks. As I look through my map to find any reserves to move them up to hold the line, some of the troops from Van Starlar's division are moving through the town of Gettysburg, but I don't notice this yet. In the meantime, I move up Krasnowski's brigade in order to a quick way to reinforce Schmeffelnig once he gets attacked, and also make the most impronounceable part of the Battle of Gettysburg. Then I move up Ames to support von Gliese and also to hopefully take the victory point, which we recently lost for some reason. Some of my regiments refuse to face the right direction, turning around. For the infantry that's easy to fix, but for the cannons that can be devastating. Some of the forces from Early's division attack the Knoll, while others move around to attack the Carlisle Road. In the meantime, the forces of Hayes' brigade are moving in to support Gordon. As the fighting goes on at Blochers Knoll, one of the rebel regiments charges up, and I'm scared they're just going to capture one of my cannons, and so I move it back. Thankfully, they stop just in front of one of my regiments and open fire on it instead, while they'll have the disadvantage of shooting at them past a fence. Thankfully, this firefight is going to our advantage since we're hiding behind fence posts and they're sitting in the stream bed. But unfortunately, in melee combat, they have the advantage. One of my cannons swivels around, firing close canister shot into the Confederate regiments in its front. The rebels moving in are trying to flank around Barlow's Knoll to get around my flank, so I move 2 of the rightmost regiments into the Carlisle Road to support my troops at the Knoll, moving them to the nearby fence posts, namely the 71st Pennsylvania and 61st Ohio. While the firefight continues, another cannon battery moves up to support Barlow's Knoll. But then, just like I was talking about the melee advantage they had, the 9th Louisiana, the Louisiana Tigers, charges and breaks 2 of our regiments. Now, I'm not sure if it's the game or the mod, but I'm pretty sure they're supposed to be done up in their nice Zouave uniforms, but I don't really know, so if you know they would be in Zouave uniforms at Gettysburg, put it in the comments. But easily breaking 2 of my regiment only shows to stand the reputation of the Louisiana Tigers. Anyways, another cannon battery moves up to reinforce the knoll. Thankfully, I move in our regiments from the Carlisle Road just in time. The Confederate unit moves in to flank the defenses of the knoll. Then I move an artillery battery to support Krasnowski and Scheffelfenning by the Carlisle Road. I'm so very paranoid about that flank because it's so hard to defend. As the Confederates advanced, I could not help but feel sorry for them, as in 1848 it was for us and the fortifications of Baden, fighting for the peace of only for the army to be sent in to dispose of us. As the two units withdraw after being attacked by the Louisiana Tigers, the final troops in my second line are coming into place. However, at the same time, a cannon battery decides to deploy in our lines, so I move it back to a better position. Meanwhile, the 41st New York is holding the bridge against 3 Confederate regiments, as von Gleiser rallies them to fight on. Meanwhile, at Gettysburg proper, the AI has decided to move forward our units through the town. However, they move them literally through the town and off-road. Our units are forced to move in between the buildings, severely depleting their stamina. And so I quickly correct this. Meanwhile, on Cemetery Hill, I decided to carry on moving forward the units that the AI had moved forward, moving them in as reserve for our line. As later on in this scenario, which we'll see in the second part of this video, this scenario will get really ugly for us. I split this video in half because the scenario is an hour and a half long, and that's way too long for most people to watch. And 1 hour long video is more than enough for this channel. Anyways, I move up Smith's brigade into the farm fields by the Carlisle Road. At the same time as our units are moving forward, Buford is sending forward his cavalry division. However, not up to our main line, just holding it near what I believe is Blochers Run. As we move back to the main line on Blochers Knoll, we notice that the Hayes Brigade of Louisianans has come in full force. In response to this, I use this small unit to extend our line. Then I pull back the last of our forces to our second line, drawing the Confederates forward as they attack our men in the cover of fences. In the meantime, we have a firefight directly in front of General Barlow, within arm's reach of him, putting him in severe danger of being captured. However, the unit is being fired on the front and flank. Hay moves up to support this unit, putting him in severe danger of being captured. As more units move up to the bridge, threatening our line, I finally pull back the 41st New York from defending the bridge, but they get drawn into a melee with the Louisianans, probably to impress von Gleiser before they're allowed to fall back. Now I'm going to move the last of the units from our first line back, including the 68th New York, which originally didn't fall back, so I'm going to take command of it and move it back, so I can more easily support our line. Briefly checking over the Carlisle Road to make sure that Doles hasn't advanced on our position, I quickly return to Blochers Knoll. Responding to units moving into our center, the 107th Ohio decide to face our center, and in doing so exposes its flank to the rebels, and so I have to move it, but it quickly moves back. But as more units move into our right flank, I decided to move in the 153rd Pennsylvania, that was acting as a reserve after resting from falling back, to move in and hold that line. During the whole affair of holding the right flank, one cannon has held the line, with the 41st New York, helping them to hold the bridge, and so our supplies, while the rebels are coming in within striking distance, have to run risky missions while they're in danger of being captured, to supply them. But then one rebel unit sweeps around our right flank, and I pull the supplies back, but the cannon opens canister fire directly into their flank, most likely inflicting heavy casualties upon them, and so I move up the 153rd Pennsylvania to quickly cover our flank before it is overwhelmed, and our line is destroyed. In the meantime, on our left, I reposition a cannon to open fire on the rebel forces to support our units there, as another Confederate unit moves in to attack, but is quickly repulsed. The firefight in our center continues, but the Louisianans are taking heavy casualties, as despite their superior numbers, they're moving in piecemeal, allowing us to easily flank them, and firing upon them with multiple units. So Krasnowski's brigade has formed into battle line, even though his brigade isn't needed quite yet. He is very keen to get into the action, but he's not needed yet, and so I return his brigade into column formation. But that's the sort of attitude we need to win this fight. However, soon after, I move his brigade into battle line into a third line if we need it, shifting it slightly so his troops can fit on the fence and gain the cover advantage. Our supply wagons are still moving in for risky resupply missions, as more Confederate units move in to attack our right flank, moving through the stream and attempting to get behind the houses to flank us. As the rebels get closer and closer, I decide to move back our cannon to decrease the chances of it being captured along with our supplies, as at the same time as the rebels get closer, the resupply missions become even more risky. One of the advantages of our line is that we have so many units ahead that we can easily fire on the rebels' flanks and rear as they move up. But as one unit gets too close, our units charge. Men up! Shows those dogs that we are not the men they face at Chancellorsville. Give them the cold steel! Charge! Für das Vaterland! And with that, our regiment charges the Louisianans. And the melee occurs perilously close to General Barlow, but not soon after our regiment is able to push them back, many of our regiments turning to face other rebel regiments as this threat had been contained. However, the rebel advance continues on our right side, which pushes back our cannon, which held for quite some time. Losing their support, the 54th New York falls back as well. Lacking support, I had to pull back our supplies. However, Krasnowski's brigade arrives, and I am able to put one of his brigades to fill in the gap. Attempting to continue on this momentum, the rebels move to attack our left with one regiment. However, they are opposed by massive amounts of fire, being fired upon their front, flank, and rear. Eventually, they are forced to stop by turning to face one of the regiments attacking its flank. They come within arm's reach of one of our regiments. Our commander was confident that these boys would break easily, and over this field, we charged up over the hill. Then we were surrounded by 3 Yankee regiments who poured fire on us from all sides. Looking over the battlefield as the firefight continues, both sides are taking horrific casualties. I open up my map to check on the battery's progress towards the front, placing their battery right behind the other batteries already present, forming a sort of grand battery in our center, not too different from what Napoleon would have done, except for on a far smaller scale, to cover our entire line. In the meantime, Krasnowski's brigade has finally made it to the second victory point, forming his line right behind the fences. Smith and Custer moved their brigades up the Carlisle Road from Gettysburg to create a reserve for our line, Smith's brigade moving up behind our battery supporting them, while Custer moved his brigade in amongst Buford's cavalry who had moved up behind Rock Creek sometime earlier during the battle. I later planned to move Custer's brigade from this position since it's already covered. However, while looking over the battlefield, my mind was changed, and I focused on something else. As rebel forces move in on our right flank, going through Rock Creek, to flank our line around the houses. During these attacks, one of the larger regiments break, forcing me to move one of the regiments of Krasnowski's brigade to support the flank, moving it behind the fences near the road. Thankfully, the larger regiment soon reforms, and I've also put them by their houses as well, putting it in the original position of the smaller regiment, and moving the smaller regiment behind the houses. In the meantime, Smith's brigade has finally made it to support the artillery, some of his units moving at the double to form the column. In the meantime, I moved Custer's brigade to the other side of the Carlisle Road by Smith's brigade, as the area he's occupying is already covered by the cavalry. Then I checked my map to make sure that all my reserves are forward, other than the one battery on Cemetery Hill, to keep the victory point. Finally, the regiment that's regrouped finally has made it to reinforce our right flank, so I halted right behind the fences for cover, while moving a smaller regiment just behind the two houses. Going back to the firefight on Blochers Knoll, I stopped the 153rd Pennsylvania, as rebel forces have crossed Rock Creek and are threatening to flank our line, then selecting the 119th New York to move around the houses and to flank the rebel forces. In the meantime, the 54th New York is moving up, but it is too tired to go into the fight, so I stopped them. As shells scream overhead, the 119th New York is having difficulty moving them into line, so I re-give them their order. In the meantime, the rebel incursion in our center is drawn to a halt. Their leading regiment, even though being supported by an officer, is caught in a salient of fire, as well as heavy shell fire from our cannons, and is quickly being forced to fall back, after taking devastating casualties. Unfortunately, while our supply lines are resupplying our line infantry, they are designed to stand in the middle of their line, blocking some of their fire towards the rebels. And with the pressure of the advancing rebels, this is unacceptable, and so, to avoid them being captured, I fall them back. In the meantime, another attack from the rebels move in, some moving around Rock Creek, while others are going over the undefended bridge, taking fire of our regiments with block fire from the supply wagon, and the kink in our line by 2 units pouring flanking fire. Finally, the attack in our center is beginning to turn around, as the regiment breaks, sending back them and their officer, freeing up the regiments nearby to fire upon the 2 nearby rebel regiments. Then looking over my map, I noticed something strange. Smith's brigade has formed into battle line, now that the rebels are really close to him, eager to get into the fray. But since the rebels are nowhere near him, I form him back into movement column, then taking command of him, moving his brigade to Blochers Knoll. Checking near the center of our line, where the regiments now are freed up, the immediate effect is obvious, that the rebels are taking heavy casualties, particularly the one on the right, on their left flank. Then I check my map once again to see how far the rebels have reached our lines, before moving slightly farther down our lines to see what the rebels are doing, seeing the brigade commanders rushing from regiment to regiment, attempting to rally them to make them hold, while the brigadier officers on our side are doing the same thing, only causing the casualties to mount on both sides. Moving farther down our line, we can see that some of our larger regiments are holding off more than one brigade, causing shredding casualties to one but not the other. Continuing down our line, the Confederate attack on our right has been eminently quite successful, as they snuck in between Rock Creek and the Harrisburg Road, and one regiment moved around the 2 houses, threatening to flank our line, advancing just over the fences before stopping, then offering our units their flank, but then in turn fires into the flank of our larger regiment, which is already under fire. Then I carried back over our line, seeing that the casualties are mounting on both sides, as brigadier generals rushed to various regiments still rallying their men to fight onward. But thankfully for us, our line is holding, despite these heavy casualties. But there's no such thing as enough firepower, so I sneak some of our cannons from our original battery on the knoll in between the gaps of our regiments to fire canister at the advancing rebel forces, inflicting heavy casualties and morale shocks. I am satisfied that the line is stable and will hold in Blochers Knoll. But as the cannons rumble into place and I'm satisfied that my line will hold, I check my map once again, and then stare aghast at just above the Carlisle Road, as an entirely new division has moved forward. This must be the men of Dole's brigade, and so I move forward the men of Custer's brigade into reserve, behind the troops of Scheffelnig who are already there, whose forces I rushed to get behind the cover of the fences, just behind Rock Creek, to move up to attempt to hold the line. But this would be an extremely tough job, as the area around the Carlisle Road just behind Rock Creek is mostly open. There are a few fence posts with big fields in between, not to mention that the majority of our forces are already holding the line at Blochers Knoll. But it appears that flank is stabilized, even though there are still rebels attacking it, so I cannot abandon it. However, the rebels on that flank have appeared to have taken heavy casualties, and we have cover and high ground, so we'll be able to hold that flank. So we can spend the majority of our focus on the attack of Dole's division. And so we zoom in for a final glance at the firefight at Blochers Knoll, at the heavy casualties of the rebel units, and General Barlow standing out in front of his forces, inspiring them to fight on. However, as I look across our lines, one of our larger regiments breaks, and so I have to fill this gap with two smaller units. One that has just recovered, that is extremely tired, and another that had just moved up from Krasnowski's brigade, only helping to deplete our reserves at Blochers Knoll in case the rebels make another attack there. And I decide to move them into the gap at the double in case the rebels decide to take advantage of the gap in our line, only causing them to get even more tired. Thankfully, the rebels don't take advantage of the gap in our line, and the units are able to get there successfully. However, they stop just short of filling in the gap, as more rebel units move in, including the feared Louisiana Tigers, with the white flag with a red cross on it, only helping them to stick out for the rest of the Confederate units, never mind their extremely fancy Zouave uniforms. And so our men stop, firing into the flank of the Tigers. Thankfully, the division that just broke reforms rather quickly, as we shift over to move to the Carlisle Road once again. But I'm still in a slight panic as Dole's division moves in to attack, and not soon afterward my men noticed them as well, firing cannon and rifle fire into them from their covered position. Men's God, more rebels are moving in. Let's make them pay for every inch. Load shell shot. Elevate 100. At my command, fire! Ryder, tell General Howard that more rebels are advancing. We will need support. As my final divisions get into position, the rebels still advance, coming under heavy shell fire, particularly the leading regiment, the 42nd Virginia, as they became exposed, advancing too quickly. But as shells scream overhead, I'm still trying to shuffle around Schmeffel's regiments, putting them in a line around on the fence posts to defend the Carlisle Road. But as I shuffle around the 45th New York, I notice that my flank is exposed. However, the nearby fences form a right angle, making good cover to deny my flank. With Custer's brigade in reserve, I'm still debating to myself whether to reinforce our center or to guard our flank in a second line, or to reinforce anybody who withdraws. Eventually, deciding that my line is way too long and they can attack on anywhere that's exposed, I move him in to defend our flank. But then the distant sound of a melee is heard from Blochers Knoll. It's one of our regiments in melee with the Louisiana Tigers. Thankfully, it's a regiment that's fresh from Krasnowski's brigade. But despite this, a heated battle is carried out, with close-range musket shots with buck and ball, and stabs with bayonets and butts with rifles. But thankfully, since the Louisiana Tigers have been fighting for quite some time, we are able to push them back with a relatively fresh unit. But just behind them, attempting to rally them, Hay moves in, but as our regiment returns to the fence and about faces, Hay is captured. Look, Ben! They're running! They'll soon learn to feel the 11th Corps! Ah, and look who it is! General Hay, I presume. Get your hands off me, dirty kraut! You have a bit of a lip on you, I'll give you that. I will take you to General Barlow myself. Sergeant, keep the men in line here! F Company, help me with these prisoners! As I look over the center of our line at the casualties that both sides have taken so far in the firefight, I am satisfied that the rebels can't push through our lines. I return to our left by the Carlisle Road where Custer's brigade has finally arrived. As I shift position from our center to our far left, notice the rebels are moving in more forces to attack our center. Then as I arrive on our left flank, I notice that the rebels are stacking up forces on our far left flank, I estimate about 2 brigades, and another brigade behind them farther up the Carlisle Road. Fortunately enough for us, the rebels haven't moved into attack yet. Moving up one regiment, which is being pounded by artillery and hit by 2 regiments. Moving back to our right flank, things are going extremely well. Despite some of our regiments being pushed back, they have quickly regrouped. We've routed about 3 rebel regiments, so far that I've seen. However, our regiments that withdrew have exposed our right flank, and so if they regrouped, I'm moving them back to fill in our right flank. Not that it would really matter since the rebel flank has been destroyed. Moving back to the center of our line, we can see the effect of the freed up regiments. The heavy casualties the rebels attacking there have sustained. We can see the condition of the rebel forces by this one advancing rebel regiment, moving up towards a severely depleted unit, only taking 1 or 2 casualties before falling back, despite the closeness of one of their brigadier generals, riding past attempting to rally another one of their units. And so I attempt to capitalize upon this by moving up the 58th New York, up to the fence line. I moved them up originally, but they're stubborn and refuse to move. Then I take command of them, moving them up to the fence post at the double. Strangely enough, after I did this, instead of moving up the 2nd Regiment, I get distracted by 2 regiments moving over to defend our right flank, and decide to position them instead, seeing that would be more important, as the rebels have made several attacks on our right flank so far. Leaving it undefended would prove disastrous. Although while guiding those troops into the cover of the fence lines, the last regiment of their attack on my right flank withdraws. Shifting to our center, the 1st Regiments of Ewell's Corps are attacking there. A little farther down the line, another brigade attacks, supporting the 42nd Virginia. But going to my extreme right flank, I finally put Custer's brigade in a rudimentary defense position, moving them on the fence line but only putting them in column to quickly shift them if needed, denying my flank to the best of my ability. Just in case the 2 brigades in front of me on my left flank decide to attack, I also put the 134th New York in reserve on the fence post of the triangular field in the center of our left flank, just in case the center collapses. However, that unit is only level 1, conscript, so it won't be effective about holding our line. Instead, I put the best unit of Custer's brigade on the front line of our flank, which is only seasoned, which is level 5. I want them to hold as there's no cover behind them. Moving back to our center, the rebels move into attack. However, they are taking heavy casualties, so take cover in the banks of the creek. But while the units in our center are distracted, 4 Confederate units sneak around them, attacking blochers Knoll. One of these units charging past our lines, endangering General Barlow by charging directly for him. However, just before they reach him, they decide to charge our regiment instead, and our regiment gladly countercharges. General Barlow bravely stands there as the melee continues right next to him, and in response to this I move up 2 regiments to support just in case the regiment breaks, as the regiments have been fighting for quite some time and are likely tired, fearing that they would break and that our position on the knoll would collapse. However, I don't decide to move General Barlow, who continues to bravely stand. Now, since we're coming up and past the 30-minute mark, I end the battle. As this scenario is an hour and a half long, and 1 hour long scenario is more than enough for this channel. And so I hope you stuck with me thus far, but the content is not over quite yet, for now it is time for Adventures in Time! Good evening, gentlemen. Oh great, another one. Mind your manners, Captain Shatterd. Remember, all the leaders of Europe are sending observers, so we'll expect more members of our little club. But where are my manners? Colonel Woods, at your service. Colonel Freemantle. Ah, I've heard of you, but I've yet to run into you. Well, I've been with the garrisons of the south. The forts along the coast, you see. Ah, we were just discussing the use of the bayonet in modern warfare. I am of the opinion it is still useful, while my colleagues... I can speak for myself, Colonel. I beg my pardon. I believe the use of massed accurate artillery and the rifled muskets makes the bayonet antiquated, and it should be retired. Well, I was looking over the report from the last battle and said that General Jackson won the battle at bayonet point. Well, the battle was entirely in the forest. In a field, it would have been a different story. Might I have a turn to talk? Why, certainly, Major Jean. It is my opinion that the lack of proper cavalry instead of this mounted infantry is a problem between the two sides. They just sit there and fire at each other, and the casualties are immense. Even the cavalry moves around and acts like infantry anyway. But that's even worse than bayonets. The target is so much bigger. Gentlemen, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I must beg my leave. I have some urgent news for the general. Do any of you know where I might find him? Ah, he's in his big tent. There's a signpost by the mill for the other buildings of the camp as well. Ah, thank you, and good day. Sometime later. Colonel Wolseley, do we have any quarters in this camp? Ah, yes. Our little piece of blighty is just over here. Right this way. Who are you? I have never heard of a Colonel Fremantle. What regiment are you in? Answer quickly or I'll have you arrested and shot as a spy. I'm with the Secret Service, helping with Operation Red. Not so loud, the Continentals might hear you. Do you have any news about the weapons? They will arrive at the end of the month. The Crown has also increased the budget, and some traders will be joining the supplies, disguised of course, as we're not involved. Ah, good. It's time these farm boys learned how to be soldiers.